This is episode 61 of That Shakespeare Life.
Hi, I'm Philippa Brawl, writer and lead historian at British History Tours. Another great method for studying history of Shakespeare includes listening to this. It's That Shakespeare Life with my friend Cassidy Cash.
One of the things that I love about Shakespeare is that he uses sort of site-specific plants, like he uses coloquintida and cork and things like that in Othello and in plays that take place in the Mediterranean or Cyprus, or he mentions the Arabian tree.
Welcome to That Shakespeare Life with Cassidy Cash. Cassidy believes that if you desire to successfully learn or perform Shakespeare's plays, then understanding the real life and history of William Shakespeare himself is a must. That Shakespeare Life is the podcast that helps you go beyond the curtain of some of Shakespeare's most iconic works and explore the world of early modern England as Shakespeare would have lived it, learning from the writers, historians, and performers who know it best. And now, here's Cassidy.
There are close to 200 plant references in Shakespeare's plays, with the bard mentioning herbs, spices, as well as the iconic roses that was such a plague to Juliet in Romeo and Juliet. With the massive amount of exploration and import of foreign goods, including plants, that was exploding across Europe during Shakespeare's lifetime, many of the plants mentioned by the bard were being seen in England for the very first time as the bard was pinning them on the page. Motivated to explore exactly how many Shakespeare did mention across 37 plays and hundreds of sonnets, our guest this week, Gerit Quealy, is the author of Botanical Shakespeare, a very detailed compilation text featuring illustrated version of the plants from Shakespeare's plays. And she joins us this week to explain some of the history of plants in England, which ones were native to the country, and how the bard knew about some of the more exotic herbs and plants mentioned in his plays. Hello, Gerit. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. We're excited to talk with you about this book. So how many plants are there in Shakespeare's plays?
It seems like such a straightforward question, doesn't it? My publisher kept asking us the same thing, but it is kind of still mutable. We say over 170. And the reason for that is, we had a beautiful index thing that was taken out of the book, and we go up to 174 there, but that's because I list separately something like rose hips, which doesn't have its own page. It's on the briars page and the quote is in the rose page, but just to get every single plant. And then there are things like thorns and briars that I did include just because he mentions them so many times and I felt that the lines were important. So the thorns are on roses, the briars are sometimes blackberry bramble. So, 170 is up is the best I can do.
Well, were all of the plants native to England?
No, they were not. And so that's one thing that's really interesting and has caused researchers to puzzle for a while over things like that. But one of the things that I love about Shakespeare is that he uses sort of site-specific plants, like he uses coloquintida and cork and things like that in Othello and in plays that take place in the Mediterranean or Cyprus, or he mentions the Arabian tree. So that's really fascinating to me that he doesn't make mistakes. There's certainly plants that wouldn't be native to certain places. But the other interesting thing about that is that John Gerard, which is probably a primary source for Shakespeare, is acknowledged as a primary source, came out with a great herbal, or herbal, if you're American, in 1597. And cork and things like that, he brought plants over, got people to bring striplings and things over for him to try and grow it. And so he did have cork in his garden. He does include those kinds of things, coloquintida, in his great herbal. So it's not like it's completely out of the realm of possibility that Shakespeare would have seen it or would have heard about it or would have gotten information about it in some way.
Well, the book references what I believe are some of these texts that you use, like Gerard's herbal, but specifically there's a 1577 Gardener's Labyrinth, which just sounds exciting because anytime you can put labyrinth on something, it's fabulous. But
Yes.
It's described as a bestseller for its time period, which made me wonder, were books on plants popular for Shakespeare's time? And besides The Gardener's Labyrinth, I know you've already mentioned Gerard's Herbal, but what kinds of books would Shakespeare have been looking at?
Well, if there was all kinds, I mean, there was a huge explosion and growth, if you will, of all of these books, because they were initially in Greek, like Dioscorides, or Latin and things like that, Dodoens. They were coming over, so you could, if you populated your garden with a lot of information from these books, you looked like a smarty pants, which was very impressive to Queen Elizabeth. But then, because the whole thrust of her reign really was to create a vernacular language, a vernacular culture, it was very impressive to then either translate, people were translating foreign material like crazy, but also writing their own. And another book in the introduction, in the umbrella of what you're talking about, is William Turner's. He's considered the father of English botany, and he wrote a new herbal in English, and it's dedicated to Queen Elizabeth. And actually, his house just went up for sale. It's outside Bath. And
oh, incredible!
I know. I was like, how much is it? I would love for them to excavate his garden, because that's where he, experimented with plants and put a lot about what he saw there and what was going on there. So anyway, so that was a big one. And then people saw how popular they were. As I mentioned in the book, literacy goes up. People start caring about plants from an ornamental standpoint, but that's filtering down into the lower orders, where they just, because the class system was so strong back then, the kitchen garden was obviously, women had a kitchen garden and a medicinal garden. You had that kind of stuff, and growing things to eat and things for your horses to eat, for instance. Shakespeare usually references peas and beans as horse feed, not necessarily to eat it yourself.
Well, that's certainly how I feel about several types of peas.
Oh, now. We want to make a Shakespeare salad out of all the vegetables in here, or like a Falstaff garden patch.
Oh, that's fantastic. Absolutely.
That'd be fun. I think that'd be fun. So all of these books there was a huge proliferation. One of the big bestsellers was about graphing trees, or grafting, we call it now. And that went into like 5 printings. And Shakespeare mentions graphing or grafting like 19 or 20 times, starting off in, having to do with plants and trees, but also using it in metaphor as well. So it's really fascinating, the whole sort of plant culture, this sort of subtext of Shakespeare now that I'm really getting into even more since doing the book.
Now, when we're exploring the plants in Shakespeare's plays, you're talking about the culture of them. And I wonder, are there any plants that Shakespeare used in his plays, which, when we encounter them now in the 21st century, we kind of brush past it like it's completely normal. But for Shakespeare, might have been foreign or exotic when he decided to include them in his story?
Well, there's a number of them. Cinnamon, we take cinnamon for granted. Cinnamon's not in Shakespeare, but nutmeg and all those other, pumpkin spice latte spices and all that stuff. So they weren't native to England, but they were importing them for so long that they did. By the 16th century, nutmeg was a staple in pretty much everybody's recipes. And there are a number of ones like that. That sugar was another one I included. It's not included in a lot of botanical references to Shakespeare as a plant, but it was a plant. But of course, it came over in these huge loaves that people sort of carved off. And it really kind of changed the culture as well, because Queen Elizabeth, for instance, was noted for having black teeth for eating so much sugar. So they really, spiked their insulin problem in the 16th century. So I included it. It's not a beautiful plant, but Sumier had drawn it, and I felt it was important to include.
Now, Gerit mentions in the book that they were careful to avoid what's called false flowers in their compilation. Gerit, please explain what you mean by a false flower.
Well, one of the things that I'm proud of with the book is that I think that we have the most accurate list of the plants that are in Shakespeare. And one of the things that I liked about the project was that it seemed like benign, because everybody fights about everything in Shakespeare, arguing about every little thing. And it turns out plants are no exception. The false flower thing was just a joke on my part, because there's a lot of lists where you'll see mint listed as in plays, and they're not, because the mint is a place for forging coins, or they a palm is a palm of your hand, a rose is a verb, So that's kind of what I meant there. But there's also a situation where I felt like I made a sort of discovery in that peonies are often listed as being in Shakespeare, but they're not. It's a word that for the Victorians were very desperate to get in flowers all over the place. And so there's this line in The Tempest that says pined and twilled, and they changed it to peonied and lilied. But it's not peonied and lilied. Both of those words are about rutting the soil to plant, making furrows for planting. The whole scene is actually about planting crops and all of that stuff and growth after Ferdinand and Miranda's marriage. And so you have to kind of take a step back and then a further step back and go, oh, there's no flowers in this whole scene. So it would be very odd for this to be. And often when we get these editions of Shakespeare, they're amended by editors and you're not really getting the first fruits, if you will. So yeah, there are no peonies, and many plays do not have mint and palm in them, I'm afraid.
For those of you with me here in the southern United States, we call those peonies. And every time I hear someone say peonies, I have to pause and think, what flower are they talking about? But that's amazing because I have heard peonies associated with Shakespeare. And I had no idea it was the Victorians who that was a very clever tweak on their part. Well,
it was, but it wasn't true. And the other thing they did is they took a lot of sex out of it. So I have to say, writing the book was kind of education for me. With the fig
research does
naughty plant.
Well, in the book, Gerit says that they specifically avoided Latin signifiers, which is like the Latin scientific names for species of plants and flowers. And they did this because Shakespeare didn't really use Latin signifiers. Now, Gerit, you say that the naming system for plants for William Shakespeare's time period was, quote, inconsistent, inaccurate, and sometimes just confusing. And you cite Gerard's Herbals specifically as an example of this. And I would like to ask you to explain what the system Shakespeare's contemporaries did use. What was it that they were using? And as a researcher, how did you know if it was, inconsistent, inaccurate, and confusing? How did you sort out which plants were the ones that you should use?
Well, because he doesn't use Latin, I didn't have to get into that. And I used what was listed in the plays, or what appears in the plays. So, there's not really, Parmacetti is an interesting one. That's one of the few we have that a lot of other, reference books and things don't have, because it's used in a metaphorical sort of connotation. Parmacetti for an inward bruise, which I just think is so beautiful.
It is beautiful.
Yeah.
Is he always using them metaphorically, though? Or is he always being poetic? Or are they associated with legends or a particular reputation for the plant? Like I know rosemary, for example, was used for remembrance. Is Shakespeare always employing the plant for its legendary reputation?
Nope. Sometimes it's just noticing it, along the pathway. Yes, of course, there's a lot of metaphor. And sometimes it's just straight up. I would have to say less, but the mountainous cedars or he has mountainous pines gusted by the threatened by the gusting winds. And so he's talking about the pine. It's not necessarily a metaphor there, but yes, roses all over the place. As you mentioned, the Ophelia Garland speech with rosemary and all of that kind of stuff. That's loaded with meaning. And I wanted to get back to the Latin thing. The reason that the Latin was confusing is because you have all these different sources coming in the 16th century, like I mentioned, Dioscorides in Greek, Dodoens, and all these other folks. And you've got monks who've got plants and they use their own Latin system. You've got other botanical writers in French using their Latin system, in Italian using Latin. So it's not all the same because everybody's kind of deciding what something is based on themselves. And apparently John Gerard used Dodoens quite a bit. There's no consistent one. That doesn't come in till Carl Linnaeus in the 18th century. So because we had very little room, that's why I couldn't go on and on in the dictionary as well about everything that Columbine means. And so I think one of the reasons why Shakespeare is just perennially interesting, because we can go in and look at a passage of, Ophelia's flowers and saying, oh, is she accusing him of infidelity? Is she saying that his time has come, like the fall of a sparrow? all the different things that Columbine means. And it changes with generations what people think it means, So,
and probably for Shakespeare, some of the draw as an artist was that you could never be quite certain what reputation or connotation or metaphor he was actually trying to use. He may have been capitalizing on the question itself.
Well, I think that's very true. I think there's layers and layers of meaning in there, which is why it's never boring, which is why you're never done with Shakespeare. And why I'm so curious about this new thing they're doing where they are translated Shakespeare into quote unquote modern English. I don't know how you get a multi-layered pun into a translation, but we'll find out.
I have very strong feelings about that I will not share.
Many people do.
But now, was there a plant, though, which Shakespeare used as you're going along and you're looking all these up? Were you surprised by anything?
I was surprised coming across Parmacetti. Actually, that's one Sumier found late in the day. The other one was caper, which is very rarely mentioned. And because in all of Shakespeare, it's mostly talked about as a dance, but in Twelfth Night, it's talked about as a dance and a plant as one of those multi-layered puns and jokes and everything that he's doing. And it's such a great little section. And it actually led me to another discovery, which I hope to be able to talk about in maybe a year, because it's really complicated to go through, and I'm working on it now. But it's been really fun to kind of, there's always something new. Anybody who thinks they know Shakespeare, if you go in from a completely different angle, you find something completely new.
Now, Gerit's book contains an introduction by the renowned Shakespearean actor Helen Mirren, and is the first introduction Helen has ever written. Now, can you tell us about how you were able to get her to write her first ever introduction on a book about plants?
I often say patience and persistence, which was a line from a movie she was in with Bill Macy, actually. I had gone, fortunately enough, I live in New York, and I went to see her in a play called The Audience, where she plays Queen Elizabeth II. And she was brilliant, of course. And about, 3 weeks after that, I was on a plane to London, and I was reading in an airline magazine that she loves gardening. And I thought, oh my God, how perfect is this? I know she loves Shakespeare, and now she loves gardening. And so I tried to reach her while she was still on Broadway, and that kind of went awry. And I had a friend at DreamWorks at the time who was able to get some contact information for me. And it took a while. I'll have to say it was a nail biter right up until about a week before the final deadline that we sent it into the publisher. But she came through, and it was just perfect, because she embodies both of the things that the book is about, and brought something new to it too, about getting your hands dirty with Shakespeare and with gardening. She thinks they should both be taught in schools in a far different way, and going to see the plays instead of being taught. So many people don't like Shakespeare because they get stuck in trochee and spondy and this and that when they're too young, where they should just be enjoying the stories.
It's beautiful, the introduction that she wrote. It comes off the page that she loves both Shakespeare and plants. So you did very well. It was nicely chosen. And I know it took a long time, but the book says, the back of the book, the introduction, the blurb on the back of the book that tells what it's about, actually uses the phrase 20 years in the making, though. And surely you were not chasing Helen Mirren down for 20 years.
No.
So I'm wondering, what was it about Shakespeare's plants that held your attention as an author? And I know you've written and published on a wide variety of subjects. So why was this one so important that you were willing to put this much time and attention into a compilation like this?
Well, to be honest, the 20 years in the making was the drawings, was Sumier, and it originates with Sumier Hasegawa, the artist. And she had been an artist, and she had been in a marriage where her husband didn't support her being an artist. It didn't think that was a good idea. And so her second husband felt differently. And he was a performer, and he was doing this thing sort of like, I describe it kind of like a pub crawl of scenes, where you go through a park and you do different scenes in different places in the park. I don't know if you guys have done that down there, but anyway, so he was performing, and she had come on board to do costuming because she had gone to FIT for textile design by that point. And she just kept hearing, Ladies pied and violets blue, and lady smocks all silver white, or daisies pied and violets blue. And she kept hearing the plants and the lines, and they just kept kind of singing in her ears. And she thought, you know what, I'm just gonna paint this one. I'm just gonna paint a daisy, or I'm just gonna paint a lady smock, which actually turned out to be slightly. But anyway, and then she thought, well, I'll just do it in these passage, and then I'll just do the ones in this scene, and then I'll just do the ones in this play. And then she got obsessed, and I think we kind of connected over the obsession thing, because I've been a Shakespeare scholar for almost 25 years now. And so we met through a mutual friend, and she said, I have all these pictures, and, I think it's a book, but I don't know what to do with it. And so I took a look and started trying to find the hole in the market to see if there could be a book out of it. And what I was stunned to find, because I was sitting at the Folger and I had a huge stack of Shakespeare's herbs and a huge stack of Shakespeare's flowers, and then I had folklore, and then I had cookery, and I was looking, and I went, oh, I have to look at all these books to find something on every single plant. Nobody's done every single plant illustrated. And so that's how it kind of came together. And then she and I think it's an interesting collaboration story, because, we had to get used to how each other worked. And I said, no, this isn't a flower. Like the anemone in Venus and Adonis is often mischaracterized as the flower, Adonis flower, because it comes from Ovid, but in fact, it's the snake's head fritillary. And so, we had to throw out the peony, for instance, or the peony. And I brought in 10 more. And then I also asked her for supplemental illustrations, because she did a beautiful branch with cherries and cherry blossoms and all that. But Shakespeare really references cherry red, and there's a cherry nose in Midsummer Night's Dream as a joke, and friendship as two cherries growing on the double stem. And so I said, I have to have 2 red cherries on a double stem, And so that's how it kind of came together.
What a perfect storm of expertise and talent, which certainly explains the marvelous compilation you guys have put together. And I know we would love to join in this obsession and explore this topic further. So what are maybe those books you were reading at the Folger, but what are some of your favorite books or resources that you could point us towards where we could learn more about Shakespeare's plants?
I wanted to do an encyclopedia, actually, but the publisher said it would take too long to get it on the market. But I still think a special anniversary edition with more like Sibley's Guide to Birds, where you've got the folklore and you've got the growing information and you've got all that stuff. We're looking at doing a garden guide, because I'd like to see Shakespeare gardens done in a completely different way than mimicking a Elizabethan knot garden, because there's so many possibilities. Like I said, the Falstaff vegetable patch. But I think you can go online and look at Henry Ellicombe, who did a compilation in 1884. He didn't have the internet, so he missed some. But he does an amazing job because of that. And also, there's a great dictionary. It doesn't have any illustrations, but it's Vivian Thomas Faircloth. Vivian Thomas and I forget the other, Nicole have a dictionary. So, and what they were able to include was all the other references like pruning and grafting, as I mentioned, and all the different garden metaphors for making your garden grow, and just also bushes and flowers that, aside from the specific plants, he has a whole sort of general reference system for growing that I think is fascinating to look at as well.
And of course, check out Botanical Shakespeare, and we'll put links to her book as well as all of these resources in the show notes for today's episode. Now, we ask everyone here at That Shakespeare Life this next very special question, and that's, what's the one book you would take with you on a deserted island? My friends in England tell me I am supposed to allow you the complete works of Shakespeare and a copy of the Bible, so your choice would be in addition to those.
Oh, no. I was going to say, of course, the First Folio, because, as I said, you're never done. Oh, well, another one. What would I take in addition? Maybe a compilation of Tom Stoppard's plays, because I think he's sort of a contemporary Shakespeare in a way. I think he's just brilliant, and I always learn more things every viewing of something that I see of his. And we saw him at the Chelsea Flower Show this year, which was
fantastic. Well, then, of course, we'll have his compilation of his plays on your deserted island. And I think you'll be set between him and Shakespeare. You should have a very comfortable island for yourself. So what's next for you? What are you working on now that you're excited about?
Well, as I mentioned, the Garden Guide, but also I completely off of Shakespeare for a little bit, mainly because of my contract, but I'm working on a book called A Field Guide to Narcissists, which is also illustrated.
That sounds fantastic.
And appropriate for nowadays, I think. And also I'm working on a documentary series about the first ladies who wielded power in the White House. So that's another plate spinning. And I actually, in working on this book, I'm doing a paper at the 16th Century Society in the fall about Queen Elizabeth and Shakespeare, and because she loved gardens so much. And was he currying favor to a degree by putting all these plants in? And then I've started to look at the ancillary writers and other writers around him and poets. We're doing a sonnet cycle reading series wherever I am and we just pick a sonneteer because there was the Elizabethan sonnet craze and everybody goes, oh yeah, the Elizabethan sonnet craze, but nobody can name anybody else besides Shakespeare who had a cycle of sonnets.
Oh no. Well, how fabulous. What a great way to study history of poetry.
Yeah. Oh, it's been absolutely fascinating. And there's this incredible map thing that came out recently. They're redoing it of this map that Michael Drayton did, who was a neighbor of Shakespeare's, with all these fairies and this whole thing of England. And I just think there's another story the plants are telling. And I'm just maybe in the beginning stages of figuring out what that is. We'll see.
Well, we will definitely look forward to keeping up with you and your projects as you move along. And we appreciate you being here to share with us about Botanical Shakespeare. I know it's been a lot of fun looking at Shakespeare's plants and herbs along with you today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's my absolute pleasure.
To find links to the resources mentioned in today's episode, as well as to learn more about Gerit and her book, Botanical Shakespeare, make sure to stop by the show notes for today's episode, where you'll find even more history on Shakespeare's plants. You can find that at CassidyCash.com/episode 61. That's CassidyCash.com/EP61. Inside That Shakespeare Life membership this month, we are focusing on Shakespeare's gardens, including a mini course on kitchen gardens, Tudor not gardens, and the utensils that would have been used in Tudor England to maintain such a garden. You can download the course as well as a PDF guide to planting your own Shakespeare garden at home by signing up to be a member at CassidyCash.com/member. That's it for this week here at That Shakespeare Life. I'm Cassidy Cash, that Shakespeare girl, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to That Shakespeare Life. As always, the best conversations happen after the episode over at CassidyCash.com. Become a part of a vibrant Shakespeare conversation by adding your voice over at the website. Until next time, remember, when you want to know William Shakespeare, you have to go behind the curtain and into That Shakespeare Life.